Hi, guys. I hope everyone is having a good week. The last week, we're finally there. Today, we're talking about the problem of human scale, and we're discussing it in regards to basically power structure, government, and I'll jump right into it. In the videos, Dr. Livingston talks about the Hobbesian ideals versus the Aristotle type ideals, and basically what we narrow it down to is small versus large and what systems fit those populations. And that's been an enormous debate and it continues to rage today. I'm going to kind of narrow it down to what I call statism versus classical liberalism. And then to do that, we need to go back and I'll actually quickly define what Hobbes meant and republics, direct democracies, etc. As Dr. Livingston points out, that the Hobbesian view uh, is meant to rule over large, indeed very large populations and land masses, which is at the time was monarchical rule. It was authoritarian, but what Hobbes does do, as what we consider the father of modern political thought, he does open the door for things like civil association, some of the things civic humanists would later talk about. Um, and it's somewhat of our understanding today. And I'll go into another point of the argument that I think has resurfaced probably in the last 10, 20 years that I think holds maybe more value than the civic humanist points. Um, but either way, all of these ideals were kind of wrapped up in this week's discussion. With human scale, the size of the population and the land mass to some extent, a republic, as we understand it now, either from Rome, maybe the Athenians and the Grecian world, and etc., was designed for a small population to function. This representative type of government that kind of separates the upper strata of the power structure. And maybe not as much in the ancient world like in Rome, but it was there. Um, and monarchical rule tended to be the model, any type of authoritarian rule for large amounts of people. Um, and that's how liberty was ordered. And that kind of, and so you have those two ideals, and I kind of lump those into statism, those that believe the state, the government, the ruling authorities that are set over uh, the masses is basically the answer to society's problems. That's what I would call statism. That's how, when the masses are disgruntled, when the economy is bad, good, or indifferent, moral issues, all goes back to the state. And Hobbes kind of put forth a lot of this in his ideology, in the 16th century. And then we have what would emerge out of that, which is what I call classical liberalism, which is um, the ideal of free market economics, representative government, individual liberty, still ordered liberty, but under a system or ruling authority that is not dictatorial, does not hold all the power, over the people. And this was what I call the ingenuity of what the founding fathers would institute. They kind of sniffed around and took the best of each system, a little bit of direct democracy, a little bit of a republic, um, and the offices that Hobbes, talks about, the second body of the king, the offices, of the presidency, the executive, the legislative, are still there, but changed to where they're all broken apart. They're not under one crown. They're interdependent. And the problem they would run into, even with this, is how is this republic type system going to work for a larger population? And so they had to be forward thinking. They had to look back to see why, either began to fail in Rome, and I would say the dividing line here comes, even though MacDonald attributes this to their civic humanism, I would argue it would be their biblicism and their ideals from the Old Testament of the Bible, how the tribes were organized under a central authority, how that central authority had to answer to the people, the priest, and all the ruling authority, and even the kings of Israel had to answer to the population, and they were chosen from among them. Obviously, the state was not the highest authority God was, which is why it worked. And I would argue that, as would, which is a great book, by the way, by Yoram Hazony, The Virtue of Nationalism, he makes this argument that the Bible puts a new political conception on the table, that a state of a single nation that is united, self-governing, and uninterested in bringing its neighbors under its rule. And this is what he talks about the nation state. And he describes and discusses these political theories, their origin, going back to Hobbes, but that it goes back farther. And this is what the founding fathers in America would uniquely lay on top of the humanism and ideals of civics that was already there from, the Romans, the Greeks, the English, Europe in general. And that's how they would make it work, to attempt to get around the problem of human scale, basically instituting tiny little direct democracies represented as little small individual free states, which were basically small republics, all under the umbrella of a large Republican umbrella. And this had never been attempted. And I lean towards it, when you look towards that they looked heavily and discussed heavily the ideals from the Old Testament, the Hebrews. They even viewed themselves in many ways as the second Israel. Indeed, Franklin's first seal proposition was Moses leading the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And I would say this would be the dividing line, that, it wasn't just the civics or the humanism and the ideals of a republic, but looking back to how do various tribes all congregate voluntarily under a system without it becoming so centralized under one man or one committee of men that then, oppress the masses. And so the individualism under classical liberalism versus the statism that Hobbes, to a degree, put forth. And we can see this even today, that, some would argue that, government is the answer, and others, like myself, would argue that government is the problem. Of course, both sides can tend to take that too far, and they do. And we see those discussions being had. But that is the problem of human scale. How do you institute a set of rules, standards, laws, and governing authority over the masses without it becoming too powerful and oppressive? And thus far, the Western world would produce America, and the American colonists would produce a system that is probably the best ideal and structure that we've been able to come up with. And that would stem out of guys like John Locke, Adam Smith, Hume, Hutchinson, all of these guys. And the founding fathers would pull from all of this and kind of run it together to solve the problem of human scale. Hope everybody enjoys this video, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.